5 weeks ago, my wife Emily met her old college roommate Vanessa for coffee in Old Town Scottsdale, and I swear that single latte changed the entire atmosphere of our home. When she walked back through our front door that afternoon, something about her energy felt off, like she had stepped into a different world and hadn't quite returned from it. She moved around the kitchen distracted, her responses delayed, her smile tight and forced. At first, I thought they must have had an awkward reunion or dredged up old college drama, but instead all I heard about was Vanessa's life now, the gated entrance in Silverleaf, the security guard who actually waved residents through by name, the sweeping desert views from the patio, and the brand-new Mercedes Gilly sitting in the driveway like some kind of trophy. Emily kept repeating the details as if she was memorizing them, her voice carrying this strange mix of admiration and disbelief. We lived in Gilbert in a comfortable but very normal four-bedroom house with beige stucco walls and a backyard big enough for a grill and a small patch of grass that never quite survived the Arizona heat. I worked as a senior systems analyst, making about $112,000 a year, which in our world meant we paid the bills on time, took one decent vacation a year, and didn't panic when the air conditioning needed repairs. I thought we were solid, not extravagant, not struggling, just stable. That used to feel like success to both of us. The shift started subtly. That first week, Emily began browsing real estate listings late at night on her tablet, the glow lighting up her face in the dark bedroom. She said she was just curious about what houses in North Scottsdale cost. By week 2, she was forwarding me Zillow links to properties in gated communities with chef's kitchens and infinity pools, adding comments like, "Can you imagine hosting friends here?" or "This is what hard work should look like." I tried to laugh it off, reminding her that our mortgage was reasonable and that we were building savings steadily. But she didn't laugh with me. Instead, she started comparing everything in our house to Vanessa's. Our countertops suddenly felt dated. Our SUV seemed embarrassing. Even the way the neighborhood looked at sunset, something we used to love, became ordinary in her eyes. By week 3, the comparisons turned into calculations. She sat at the dining table with a notebook, scribbling numbers, asking me how realistic it would be for me to move into management, whether I had considered switching companies for a bigger salary, whether we were underachieving. Underachieving. That word hit me harder than she probably intended. I had spent years building my career, working late deployments, earning certifications, taking on projects nobody else wanted, all so we could have the stability. Now it felt like she was measuring me against a man I had never met, a high-power executive whose life looked polished through the lens of a single coffee date. By week 4, she began dropping Vanessa's husband's title into casual conversation, emphasizing the bonuses, the stock options, the travel. She started following luxury influencers on Instagram, showing me curated photos of marble bathrooms and designer closets, saying things like, "This is the level we should be at by now." It no longer felt harmless. It felt like I was being audited. Every purchase we made, every decision about budgeting, every plan for the future suddenly came with an unspoken comparison to Silverleaf and that Mercedes in the driveway now 5 weeks in. I can feel the tension hanging in the air even when we are silent. I walk through our perfectly fine home and see it through a new lens, like it is being graded and found lacking. What scares me most is not the money or the house or the car. It is a realization that one afternoon in Old Town turned our marriage into a competition neither of us signed up for, and I am starting to feel like I am losing to a life that was never meant to be ours. By the end of the first week, I could practically predict when the Mercedes story was coming because Emily found a way to weave it into 4 separate conversations, each time adding a little more detail, each time sharpening the image of that random Tuesday morning surprise with the oversized red ribbon stretched dramatically across the hood. She described how Vanessa had come outside in her robe, how the neighbors supposedly gathered to watch, how her husband filmed the whole thing for Instagram. The way Emily told it did not sound like casual storytelling. It felt rehearsed, deliberate, like she was placing the scene carefully in front of me to see what I would do with it. I responded calmly every time. Say it was a generous gesture, that it was thoughtful, that it must have been exciting. I kept my tone even, steady, refusing to rise to whatever invisible challenge was being set. I could see the disappointment flicker across her face when I did not escalate the conversation into a grand promise of my own. The Mercedes was only the opening act. Within days, the stories expanded into designer purses gifted for anniversaries, spontaneous Cabo vacations booked in first class, a full kitchen remodel with imported marble flown in from Italy as if it were nothing more than ordering takeout. Each detail was delivered with the same pattern, a build-up, a pause, then silence as she looked at me with an expectation hanging unspoken between us. I could feel the weight of that pause pressing against my chest. It was as if she was waiting for me to declare that we would upgrade everything, that I would somehow unlock a higher income bracket overnight and transport us into that gated world she had glimpsed. Our evenings started to feel transactional. Instead of talking about our day or what we want to cook for dinner, we were suddenly comparing lifestyles. She scrolled through Vanessa's social media feed in bed, tilting the screen toward me to show polished countertops and perfectly curated closets. I noticed how her tone shifted when she said words like luxury and exclusive. There was an edge to it, something restless. I tried to ground the conversation in reality, pointing out that social media was curated, that people only show the highlights, that financial stability matters more than appearances. The more reasonable I sounded, the more distant she seemed. When she suggested we just browse luxury SUVs one Saturday afternoon, the phrasing was almost casual, but I could hear the underlying demand. I reminded her that our Acura was only 2 years old and fully paid off, that we had chosen specifically because it balanced reliability and cost, that driving a new badge would not magically improve our lives. The moment the words left my mouth, I saw the frustration harden in her expression. It was subtle but unmistakable. Her jaw tightened, her eyes narrowed slightly, and there was a heaviness in her silence that had not been there before. From that point on, the comparison stopped sounding like admiration and started feeling like accusation. It was no longer just Vanessa has this or Vanessa did that. It became we could have more, we should have more, why don't we have more? I felt like I was standing trial for not delivering a life she had only recently decided she deserved. The resentment did not explode outward in a dramatic fight. Instead, it settled into the space between us, quiet but corrosive. I could sense that my calm responses were being interpreted as lack of ambition, as complacency, as failure to compete in a game I never agreed to play. Each mention of Silverleaf, each reference to the red ribbon on that Mercedes hood, carried a sharper undertone, and I began to understand that this was no longer about a car or a purse or a vacation. It was about how she now measured me, and I could feel the scale tipping in a direction I could not control. By week 2, the tone of our conversations shifted from subtle hints wrapped in admiration to direct comparisons delivered with uncomfortable precision, and I could feel the air between us tightening every time she opened her mouth to bring up Vanessa's husband again. Emily began asking why I was not pushing harder for promotions, why I seemed content in my current role, why I was not aggressively networking or positioning myself for executive leadership. She asked what my 5-year income projection looked like, as if she were interviewing me for a position I did not realize I was applying for. And when I gave her a realistic breakdown of expected raises, potential bonuses, and the possibility of moving into a lead architect role, she listened with a detached expression that made it clear she was calculating something else entirely. She mentioned that Vanessa's husband was already a regional director at 36, that he managed multiple teams across states. That ambition was attractive, and she let that last sentence hang in the air long enough for it to land exactly where she intended. It was not just about numbers anymore. She started critiquing the way I presented myself, looking at my work wardrobe like it was evidence of mediocrity. She suggested I invest in tailored suits, in higher-end shoes, in watches that projected authority. She said looking executive could influence how leadership perceived me, that image mattered, that I needed to elevate my brand. I stood there in my perfectly acceptable business, casual attire, feeling like it had suddenly become a symbol of failure. For years she had told me she appreciated that I was grounded and practical, that I did not chase status symbols, that stability was sexy. Now those same qualities were being reframed as lack of drive. One evening I sat down with her at the dining table and opened my laptop, pulling up the financial plan I had meticulously built over the last few years. I showed her our retirement contribution steadily compounding, our emergency fund covering 6 months' expenses, the projected savings trajectory for a future college fund once we had kids. I explained how we were ahead of the average household in our bracket, how we were positioned for long-term security rather than short-term flash. I expected at least a flicker of reassurance, some acknowledgement that we were building something solid and responsible. Instead, she stared at the spreadsheet like it was a sentence she had been forced to serve. Her eyes scanned the rows and columns without warmth, without pride. She leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly, and then she said she felt like she had settled. The word landed in my chest with a weight I cannot fully describe. Settled did not mean we had compromised on a house or chosen a sensible car. Settled meant she saw our entire life as a consolation prize. Settled meant she believed there was a better version of her future that I had somehow failed to deliver. In that moment, I stopped hearing comparisons to Vanessa as harmless envy and started hearing them as indictment. I replayed that word in my mind over and over that night as I lay awake beside her. Settled implied she had options she had turned down, that she had chosen me over something superior and now regretted it. It reframed every compliment she had ever given me, every moment she had said she was proud of me. I felt reduced to a line item on her internal balance sheet, evaluated against an imaginary benchmark that shifted higher each week. The stability I had worked so hard to create suddenly felt invisible. The late nights, the certifications, the careful budgeting, the quiet sacrifices, none of it seemed to matter in a world where ambition was measured in titles and gated communities. What hurt the most was not the comparison to another man's salary or job title. It was a realization that she no longer saw me as enough. When she said she had settled, it stripped away the sense of partnership I thought we shared and replaced it with competition. I could feel something fundamental shifting inside me, a fracture forming where trust used to sit. Because once someone believes they've settled, they start looking for proof that they deserve more, and I was beginning to understand that I might not survive that search. By week 3, the tone in our house shifted from comparison to indictment, and it felt like every conversation, no matter how small or unrelated, circled back to what I was not providing. It did not matter if we were talking about dinner plans or weekend errands. Somehow it would land on lifestyle, status, or what she called potential. Emily created a shared online wish list and invited me to view it as if it were some playful couple activity. But when I opened it, I saw luxury watches priced higher than my first car, diamond bracelets displayed under dramatic lighting, and a $4,000 handbag described as timeless investment. She labeled the list inspiration, but it felt less like inspiration and more like a scoreboard of my perceived shortcomings. She would sit beside me on the couch scrolling through the items, occasionally glancing at me with an expression that mixed expectation and judgment. She openly asked whether I even wanted to give her a special life, emphasizing the word special as though our current reality was embarrassingly ordinary. I told her that love was not measured in invoices, that commitment was not proven by receipts, that what we had built together mattered more than a logo stitched into leather. She did not soften at that. Instead, she said real men show love through provision, and the way she said it made it clear she believed I was failing some unspoken standard of masculinity. The phrase echoed in my mind long after the conversation ended. Real men provide. I had provided stability, security, predictability, but apparently those qualities did not qualify as real anymore. I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the air conditioner, replaying the last 3 weeks in my head. The admiration for Vanessa's life had transformed into dissatisfaction with ours, and dissatisfaction had turned into personal critique. It was no longer about ambition or self-improvement. It was about redefining my worth based on my earning ceiling and the brand of car in our driveway. That night, something inside me shifted. I stopped trying to defend myself with logic or spreadsheets. I stopped countering every comment with a calm explanation about long-term planning. Instead, I started documenting. I saved her texts when she compared me to Vanessa's husband. I wrote down the dates when she said she felt she had settled. I recorded the exact phrasing of comments about real men and provision in a private note on my phone. I did not do it out of spite. I did it because I felt something deteriorating, something foundational cracking beneath the surface, and I needed clarity. The more I wrote, the clearer the pattern became. The comments were not isolated frustrations. They were escalating. Each week the bar moved higher and the tone grew sharper. I realized this was not about mutual growth or shared goals. Growth would have sounded like collaboration, like how can we build together, like what steps can we take as a team. What I was hearing sounded like blame dressed up as motivation. It sounded like dissatisfaction framed as ambition. It sounded like respect slowly being withdrawn. When she spoke about luxury now, it was no longer with excitement. It was with entitlement. When she spoke about my career, it was no longer with pride. It was with critique. I recognized that arguing would only feed the cycle, would turn every night into a debate about my adequacy. So I decided I would not argue anymore. I would observe. I would listen. I would document. I would wait. Waiting did not mean surrender. It meant restraint. It meant understanding that reacting emotionally would cloud my judgment. I could feel the dynamic shifting into something transactional, and I needed to see where it was heading before I made any decisions. So I became quiet. I answered politely. I stopped volunteering explanations. And while she scrolled through diamond bracelets and handbags, I quietly gathered evidence of a deeper issue, one that had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with how she now saw me. By week 4, I stopped resisting the narrative she was building and decided instead to step directly into it, because I had realized that arguing only reinforced her belief that I lacked vision. When she mentioned that Vanessa's husband had planned a surprise trip to Maui, complete with oceanfront suites and private excursions. I did not counter with a lecture about budgeting or long-term investments. I simply nodded and told her she deserved someone like that, someone who orchestrated grand gestures without hesitation. I watched the way her posture softened when I said it, how her shoulders relaxed as if she had finally heard the validation she had been fishing for. When she brought up the Mercedes again, this time with even more detail about the interior trim and the panoramic sunroof, I calmly asked what exact model it was and how much it cost out the door. She lit up at the question, mistaking my curiosity for conversion. She believed I was finally catching up to her new standard of aspiration. I maintained that composure deliberately. I asked follow-up questions about the gated community, about the maintenance fees, about the cost of remodeling a kitchen with imported marble. I made mental notes while appearing engaged. She interpreted my interest as growth, as awakening ambition, as a husband finally ready to compete. In reality, I was studying the psychology of what had shifted in her, observing how easily admiration turned into comparison, and comparison into entitlement. I had stopped defending myself because defense implied guilt, and I no longer intended to argue over my worth. That same week, I quietly made arrangements. I booked a weekend getaway to Sedona at a boutique resort perched against the Red Rocks, a place known for its intimate atmosphere and panoramic sunset views. I reserved a suite with a private balcony, not because I wanted to impress her with extravagance, but because I wanted to create a controlled setting. I made a reservation at an upscale restaurant overlooking the cliffs, a place where the desert glowed crimson at dusk, and the lighting was soft enough to encourage honesty. Every detail was intentional. Every confirmation email saved in my inbox like another piece of documentation. Then I extended an invitation to Vanessa and her husband to join us for dinner that Saturday evening. I framed it as a chance to finally meet properly, to celebrate reconnecting, to enjoy a refined weekend together. When I told Emily they'd accepted, her excitement was immediate and unfiltered. She hugged me in a way she had not in weeks, telling me how proud she was that I was stepping up, that I was open to learning from people who operated at a higher level. She genuinely believed I was about to humble myself in front of her example couple, that I would sit across from that regional director and absorb the blueprint for becoming a better provider. I watched her enthusiasm carefully. She began planning her outfit days in advance, mentioning how important first impressions were among successful couples. She spoke about the weekend as if it marked a turning point in our trajectory, as if this dinner would somehow realign our lives towards silverleaf and luxury vehicles. I did not interrupt her optimism. I let her believe that I was finally aligning with her vision. Inside, however, I felt a different kind of clarity. I was not preparing to compete. I was preparing to observe dynamics up close, to see whether the image she had built in her mind matched reality. I wanted her to sit across from the very life she had been glorifying and experience it without filters or social media captions. I wanted the contrast to exist in a real space, not through curated stories. So I agreed, I smiled, and I finalized every reservation. While she thought I was stepping into ambition, I was quietly stepping into strategy, determined to let reality speak louder than my defenses ever could. Dinner in Sedona unfolded exactly as I expected, elegant on the surface, but charged underneath with something far less refined. The restaurant overlooked the Red Rocks just as the sun was melting into the horizon, painting everything in deep orange and crimson tones that made the setting feel almost theatrical. The tablecloth was crisp, the lighting soft, the kind of place where voices naturally lower and conversations sound more important than they are. Vanessa arrived in a fitted designer dress that caught the candlelight, her husband polished and controlled in a tailored blazer that likely cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Emily sat beside me glowing with anticipation, glancing at me as if this entire evening was proof that I was finally stepping into the version of myself she had been demanding. Vanessa wasted no time diving into stories about their infinity pool installation, describing the custom tile imported from Spain and the way the water seemed to disappear into the desert horizon. She spoke about their upcoming European cruise as if it were routine, listing ports in Italy and France with casual detachment. Emily nodded along eagerly, occasionally squeezing my hand under the table as though silently thanking me for bringing us into this orbit. I kept my expression neutral and ordered a $300 bottle of wine without hesitation, watching the waiter present it with exaggerated ceremony. The gesture was deliberate. I needed the illusion intact just long enough. The conversation flowed predictably until Emily made her move. With a smile that was both proud and performative, she told Vanessa and her husband that she hoped our marriage could mirror theirs, that she admired how they had built such an elevated life together. The words hung in the air heavier than she intended. She looked at me expectantly, almost daring me to disagree in front of them. Instead, I smiled calmly and said I had learned a lot over the past 5 weeks of hearing about their lifestyle. I thanked them for the inspiration in a tone so steady it disarmed the table. Then I began listing comparisons, not angrily, not dramatically, but methodically. I mentioned the Mercedes with the red ribbon on a random Tuesday morning and how it had been presented as a benchmark of what real love looked like. I referenced the surprise Maui trip and how ambition had been described as attractive in contrast to my supposed complacency. I brought up the designer purses, the diamond bracelets, the $4,000 handbag on the shared wish list labeled inspiration. I spoke about the gated community, the imported marble kitchen remodel, the infinity pool. Each item was laid out like an exhibit in a quiet courtroom. I explained calmly how each story had been delivered with a pause, how each detail had been framed as evidence that I was not providing enough, not earning enough, not aspiring enough. I said that over 5 weeks those comparisons had shifted from admiration to indictment, that they had been used as proof that I was inadequate. My tone never rose. I did not accuse Vanessa of anything. I simply described the effect her curated life had on my marriage when filtered through constant comparison. The restaurant around us seemed to shrink into silence. The low hum of other diners continued, but our table felt sealed off, insulated by discomfort. Vanessa's expression changed first. The confident glow she had carried dimmed into something closer to shock, her eyes darting briefly to her husband as if searching for damage control. Her husband avoided eye contact entirely, staring down at his plate with a rigid jaw, his posture tightening as if he had just realized he was sitting inside a conversation he never consented to join. Emily's composure fractured in real time. I saw the color drain from her face, the panic flicker behind her eyes as she understood that I was not competing tonight. I was clarifying. Her earlier pride shifted into something defensive, something unsettled. She attempted a small laugh, as though to reframe the moment as harmless exaggeration, but the sound died quickly in a way to what had already been said. The illusion she thought we were performing had dissolved, and in its place sat the quiet truth of how comparison, repeated often enough, turns admiration into erosion. I delivered my final line without raising my voice, without theatrics, without anger cracking to the surface, because anger would have allowed her to dismiss everything as emotion instead of truth. I looked directly at Emily and told her she deserved a man who measures love by his credit limit, a man who believes devotion is proven through wire transfers and surprise deliveries with oversized bows. I told her I was not that man and never would be, not because I lacked ambition, but because I refused to define my worth or my marriage by the price tag of a vehicle or the square footage of a gated estate. I explained that if what she truly wanted was someone who expresses affection through escalating financial gestures, then she was free to pursue someone like Vanessa's husband once our divorce was finalized. The silence that followed was suffocating. It pressed against the table like an invisible weight, heavy and undeniable. Emily's face shifted from panic to disbelief, as if she had expected resistance but not resolve. She immediately tried to backpedal, her words tumbling over each other in an attempt to soften what had already been said. She claimed it was all motivation, that she only wanted to push me to reach my potential, that it was harmless girl talk taken out of context. She insisted she never meant to imply I was inadequate, that she only admired certain aspects of Vanessa's lifestyle, not the comparison itself. Her voice wavered in a way I had not heard before, the confidence she carried all evening dissolving under clarity of my decision. Vanessa sat rigid, her earlier enthusiasm gone, while her husband remained focused on the table, as though eye contact would implicate him further. No one interrupted me. No one defended the narrative that had been built over 5 weeks. The curated image of aspiration no longer felt glamorous in that moment. It felt hollow. I stood up slowly, composed, and signaled for the check, even though I already knew the total would be excessive. When the bill arrived, I paid it in full without comment, signing the receipt with steady hands. I told Emily she could ride back with her friends since she admired their car so much, and I meant it not as cruelty, but as clarity. If she valued that symbol so highly, she could sit inside it and reflect on what it represented to her. I did not wait for another rebuttal. I did not argue further. I walked out of the restaurant into the cool Sedona night air, the desert quiet wrapping around me in stark contrast to the tension I had just left behind. The drive back to Phoenix felt strangely calm. The highway stretched ahead in long, dark lines illuminated only by headlights and distant city glow. There was no dramatic music playing, no internal monologue filled with rage. There was only a steady sense of certainty. I checked into a hotel on the outskirts of the city, a simple room with neutral walls and a faint smell of industrial cleaner. I placed my phone face down on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed for several minutes, absorbing the stillness. I did not feel defeated. I felt finished. By Monday morning, I had scheduled a consultation with a divorce attorney. The meeting was efficient and clinical, a discussion of assets, timelines, documentation. I handed over the notes I had been compiling for weeks, the saved texts, the recorded comments. The attorney listened carefully, outlining next steps with professional detachment. As I left the office, I understood something with absolute clarity. I was not competing with another man's salary or lifestyle. I was not racing toward a gated community to prove my value. I was exiting a dynamic that had begun to measure me in ways I refused to accept. I chose not to argue further, not to beg to be seen differently. I chose to step out entirely, because love should never feel like an audition, and I had no intention of staying on a stage where my worth was constantly up for review. The aftermath unfolded exactly the way I anticipated once the shock wore off and reality settled in. Emily showed up at my office 3 days after the dinner in Sedona, waiting in the lobby with red eyes and carefully styled hair, as if presentation might reverse the decision I had already made. She asked the receptionist to tell me it was urgent, that we needed to talk face-to-face, that I owed her that much. I met her in a neutral conference room with glass walls and kept the door slightly open, not out of cruelty but out of clarity. She cycled through every emotional register available to her, starting with anger about how I embarrassed her, then shifting to disbelief that I would escalate things so quickly, and finally landing on desperation. She insisted I had misinterpreted everything, that she had only been trying to motivate me, that couples push each other to grow. Her voice cracked at carefully timed intervals, but the substance never changed. She reframed weeks of comparison as encouragement and months of erosion as ambition. When I did not budge, the voicemails began. Some were sharp and defensive, accusing me of overreacting and throwing away a marriage over pride. Others were soft and pleading, promising she would never bring up Vanessa again, that she did not need luxury, that she only needed me. The inconsistency said more than the words themselves. Vanessa, for her part, cut her off completely after realizing how their marriage had been weaponized as a measuring stick in ours. I later learned that the dinner had forced a conversation in their household as well, one that apparently was less glamorous than the curated stories suggested. We met one final time at a quiet cafe in Tempe to discuss logistics. There was no raised voice, no spectacle, just two people sitting across from each other with the remnants of something that once felt solid. I asked her to name 3 things she genuinely appreciated about me without mentioning money, career trajectory, or ambition. I did not ask it as a trap. I asked it because I needed confirmation of what I already suspected. She paused longer than she should have. She said I was reliable. She said I was kind. Then she hesitated, searching for a third quality that did not orbit around provision or potential. The silence stretched until it became answer enough. She eventually muttered something about my work ethic before catching herself, realizing it drifted back to ambition. She never found a third. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized without drama. I kept the house because it was financially practical and because I refused to abandon something I had built through steady discipline. The process was administrative rather than emotional by that point. 3 months after the papers were signed, I received a promotion I had quietly been working toward for years, along with a raise significant enough to comfortably afford the exact Mercedes she once held up as proof of devotion. The irony did not escape me. I ran the numbers, looked at the projections, and chose to increase my investments instead. The money went into index funds and long-term growth, not into a ribbon display of validation. I am now dating someone who drives a 10-year-old Honda with faded paint and thanks me sincerely for simple dinners cooked at home. She compliments the way I listen, the way I plan ahead, the way I stay calm under pressure. She never once asked about my 5-year income projection. The quiet appreciation feels foreign in the best possible way. What I learned is simple and irreversible. Once respect is gone, no car, no vacation, no imported marble can buy it back. Respect erodes slowly through comparison and returns only through recognition. And if recognition is absent, the wisest move is not to compete harder, but to walk away with dignity intact.